Let's get a quick roundup of coronavirus developments around the world now. The global death toll has now exceeded 165,000, according to Johns Hopkins University in the U.S. New Zealand says it's extending its strict lockdown conditions for another week. China says it has had 0 deaths for the 3rd day in a row. And the UN Refugee Agency says coronavirus lockdowns are having a huge negative impact on the lives of displaced women and girls. And let's talk more about that aspect now. We have Gillian Triggs with us. She's the Assistant High Commissioner for Protection at the UNHCR. Gillian, good to have you with us here on DW. We know that women and girls are always especially vulnerable as refugees, but your organization is saying that this pandemic has exacerbated the situation. Why is that?
Well, we believe that there's been a very significant risk for women and girls in refugee-like situations, those internally displaced, 41 million displaced in their own country. And we believe this is to be true, partly because we have a global phenomenon of gender-based violence, which is going up significantly, as reported by a number of states, particularly France recently reported a 30% increase in sexual-based violence amongst the general population. The difficulty and the very special element that is important to us at UNHCR is that refugees, displaced people, live very often in very cramped and crowded circumstances, many of them in camps, by no means all, but nonetheless in very cramped circumstances where it's very difficult to socially distance, to wash hands, and to take the precautions that one can make in other contexts. So we think that women and girls are at a very high level of risk of increased violence, what we're seeing also in the general population.
Does this mean that women and girls are essentially stuck because of lockdown measures in the same spaces as their abusers?
Exactly. In other words, we're all at home, we're stuck, as you say, and it's especially difficult for women and girls. I should also point out, of course, that the most vulnerable people are refugees to losing their jobs. They're at the bottom of the pyramid, they're informal workers, so that husbands, women are losing their jobs. And so in that extremely vulnerable situation, tensions in the household are increased, and we see a much greater risk for women and girls in those situations. Also, the risk, and what we're particularly concerned, that women will look to other mechanisms, sex, prostitution, to in some cases forced marriages. We're very worried that those are going to be consequences for the refugee population and also for those internally displaced within their own countries.
So, Gillian, what do you suggest should be done to help women and girls who are displaced? Are we talking about specific shelters during this pandemic?
Well, yes. In other words, it's always been a problem in general populations to ensure that shelters are available, but the situation is now considerably worse. Shelters are being closed down, access to information, it becomes limited. So what UNHCR is doing is using, as many of course are in the community, using all the technology we can lay our hands on to communicate, to manage cases that come to us, and there are many, many thousands, so that we can do it through telephones, through internet connections, through hotlines. We also work very much through community groups in the field. And one interesting example is that volunteer workers are giving their phones to women who can then use those phones to make the connections and get the information that they want, and also to get referrals to agencies, legal advice, legal support services. So our message to national governments is please include and ensure that protection services for women and girls are maintained as essential services, but also that they listen to the voices of women, particularly in making decisions about how to deal with the coronavirus. Because, of course, it's women, again, who are the carers. They're the ones, not only are they at home looking after children who can't go to school, but they are carers for those within the community. So we are asking for governments to give special consideration. Thank you.
Gillian Triggs from the UNHCR, thank you so much for joining us on DW.